Here we go. And we're live.
Hey
Hey,
man,
man.
good to see you. How are you doing?
Good. I'm on a wonderful California adventure
Excellent.
and on the road here, taking our baby girl to college. She's going to be a senior down in Southern California College. And, well, it's amazing. Great time. Wonderful.
Yeah,
Hopefully, my internet's going to hold up decently here for us.
just
We'll
about. Yeah,
find
it's
out.
the odd
How are you?
cutout. The odd cutout. Yeah, I'm good. And excited about today's topic,
Yeah.
Amazon SEO. It kind of amazing, or keyword ranking on Amazon, whatever way you want to put it. Amazon ranking, product ranking. Kind of amazing that we haven't talked about this before, or at least if we have, it's been a long time. So
Yeah.
it's very overdue because it's the
Yeah.
obsession, rightly so, of pretty much every person who sells on Amazon. So an overdue topic, but
Yeah.
I've been digging through this and trying to make sure that what I have to say is as up to date as possible because it's quite an involved topic like any SEO. So interesting discussion coming up, I
Well,
think.
yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a great one. Obviously, you work with coaching clients, 5 days a week on this detailed stuff for private label sellers. Really, anyone who can edit or modify a Amazon listing is sort of the
Exactly
target
right.
conversation audience for this. So we'll have a great time today. As always, is our custom. We'll hit record on the podcast session in a couple minutes here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. I'm going to be the inquisitive, question asker, and you're going to be the leader of this topic for sure, man. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that I think it's interesting to try and place the Amazon SEO thing in a bit of context of SEO in general and platform kind of operating
Hmm.
within somebody else's land, if you like. And actually, we all operate on somebody else's land. If you're American, you operate on
Hmm.
land that you may feel belongs to the American people, maybe, but it belongs definitely to the American government, and their rules are kind of a platform. So, I'd like to start off with this sort of taking a broad view
Ooh,
and then diving straight into
theoretical.
Amazon. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, that's true. I didn't know you were going macro,
No,
but
well,
that's
only
that's true.
for a
But that's good.
microsecond. But I just think it's
Yeah.
important to not just get too obsessed
Yeah.
with. It's good to differentiate between SEO
Yeah.
principles in general and then the ones that apply on a specific platform. And the
Hmm.
reason for that, I think, is very simple: that we forget why we forget why platforms exist and
Yeah.
why ways of operating on them work and why they
Hmm.
don't. And if we think about the
Right.
bigger picture of what they're trying to achieve
Hmm.
and align ourselves with that, that's my main hint is that things tend to go well. If you're trying to hack
Sure.
your way and swim upstream, then maybe not so much.
Yeah, this is great, and obviously, take your point completely. For most of the people we work with that are Shopify site builders, it's Google
Yeah.
SEO focus. But you and I are on our own journey for optimizing for the word e-commerce with and without
We
the
are indeed.
dash for our podcast. And so, when you search on Spotify for e-commerce with and without the dash, that's the keyword that we're focused on for our podcasting work. And so, yeah, marketplaces or platforms have such you know commonalities that I think this stuff makes sense across the board
Mm,
for many people. But in today's episode, we're going to do a deep dive for Amazon sellers
absolutely.
and product listers or optimizers. So why don't we kick this thing off
Yeah,
and
let's
we'll
do it.
jump into it together? Yeah. Okay. Cool. You're going to do the intro and then we'll go from
Um,
there. So let's do
excellent.
this thing.
Right. 1 second. Just click off on the distracting website. Here we go. SEO, in its broadest sense, is a very powerful and important source of traffic for any e commerce operator, SEO being search engine optimization. But Amazon SEO, you know what? I'm going to start that again and integrate that. Take two. He put the thing on me. SEO, or search engine optimization, in its broadest sense, is a very, very powerful and important source of traffic for any e commerce operator on any platform: Google, Amazon, Pinterest, you name it. But Amazon SEO, or Amazon keyword ranking, if you will, is rightly more than important. It's almost an obsession of any really focused e commerce operator who sells on Amazon. Getting your product listing to rank on Amazon for powerful keywords is indeed incredibly important. Get it wrong, and it pretty much doomed your product to either low sales or fair sales, but no profit. Frankly, Jason, it's mostly a loss, but I don't depress the listeners too much. Get it right, though, and it drives not only sales and revenue, but most importantly, profitable sales and healthy cash flow. But there are quite a few myths and some misconceptions around this topic. And above all, I feel there's an unhealthy focus on hacks and trying to fool the algorithm, and it's not limited to Amazon, but that's particularly prevalent, rather than taking what I think of as a more strategic approach. Cutting Amazon SEO off from other business decisions like what market you sell into, cost structure, and optimizing your listings for conversion is not only mediocre thinking, it isn't really possible to separate those two with Amazon SEO in particular. So I'm really going to advocate a holistic approach that includes market share choice, getting economics for your product right, and conversion optimization. In my view, that's the only effective approach to Amazon SEO. So that's the sort of framework for today's discussion. So today we're going to deep dive into this topic. And as with our recent episode on conversion, Jason, my aim for both of us is to help the listeners to increase their profits as they work to increase sales as well. Are you ready to dive into today's topic?
Oh, I love it, man. Let's dive into this topic. I think it's going to be a great one, and really looking forward to it. So let's start with the basics of it all. How do you define SEO? Well, tell us what the top level information is.
Good question. So broadly, it is Tommy Griffith, a guest of mine on the podcast, who was the head of SEO for PayPal and Airbnb, says that it's a question of document relevant queries. It sounds a bit academic. Lest we forget, the originators of SEO, the Google guys, were both PhD holders. So it is kind of a nerd's response to the question of how do I give a relevant answer to a question, if you will, to put it most simply. Obviously in Google, you're simply looking for answers. On Amazon, it's complicated by the fact you're looking for answers and you're then potentially going to go on and buy the product. So I guess that's one of the essential differences at the highest level between Google and Amazon.
Document relevant query. That's interesting. So basically your product listing is the document.
Exactly. I guess relevance is a query, and relevance to a query is really the key word to bear in mind. I think that's kind of a golden word to bear in mind, really.
Yep. Okay. Awesome. So let's break this down for the conversation today. Who exactly is the right audience for this conversation? How would you explain kind of what you're going to lay out for us today? Yeah.
Well, broadly, as you said, it's most relevant to those who have the possibility of changing an Amazon listing. So for private label or custom product sellers, all of it's going to be relevant. So the strategic factors like, how much you paid for your product, can you make the economics work anyway, and the market choice. For everyone, market choice, I guess, to a degree is a relevant factor, actually, which I hadn't thought about. If you choose to do retail arbitrage or something with 55 sellers on your listing, and that's going to be pretty grim, but that's not really an SEO question exactly. For anyone who gets to optimize the listing, it's still relevant. So wholesalers, if they can, those who are doing wholesale sourcing, if they can get permission from the brand owner to modify the listing, particularly that often comes with an exclusivity agreement, then it's very, very relevant to you, and it's underused. So that's a very powerful strategy. And for everybody, even including those who do retail arbitrage, advertising on Amazon inevitably ties into organic SEO. And actually, if you didn't know, you can advertise on wholesale or retail arbitrage products profitably, and that means it is actually a relevant part of your strategy. So you might help your listing rank organically better, which will benefit other people, but it will also benefit you. So it's a little bit sort of tangential for RA. For wholesalers, it could be very relevant. For private labelers, 100% relevant.
Okay, great. I love it. So explain to us why the work here is so important. I mean, obviously we all know you can put a listing up real fast, and you can always use Amazon, AdWords. Basically, its version of AdWords, AMS, as they used to call it, and now it's advertising at Amazon or whatever. Can't you just kind of throw it up there and use advertising to get the job done and put it at the top of the list? Or how does that not help, or how is SEO more important than that?
Well, you can throw money at advertising and get it to the top of the list, but depends which list you're talking about. So on Amazon search results, just like on Google, of course, you have your sponsored search results, in other words, that are advertising driven, and then you have your organic search results. The issue in both cases is really that the economics are against you. So on Amazon, you can rank to a degree by brute force, i.e. outspending competition. But the difference between Amazon and your own direct-to-consumer site is an interesting one, because I've got one client, just the one at the moment, who's got primarily just his own direct-to-consumer site, does not sell on Amazon. He did approach me and I said to him, look, I'm not a Shopify specialist. And he said, well, there are various sort of strategy things I think you're good at, and it's working out so far. But anyway, he is really driving his business by Google Ads, right? But that's interesting because number one, his products range in cost from about to the consumer from about $200, $300 up to $3,000. So that means the economics can work differently. And number two, he can upsell, downsell, cross-sell, and all the things you can do as a direct-to-consumer site owner. We don't have that option on Amazon. So the economics almost definitely mean you lose money if you're just using ads. So on Amazon, I would say you have almost zero choice. You have to get organic SEO working.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so to get it working, then, that's the key thing that you're going to walk us through a little bit, like how to tune it up, that kind of thing. But before we jump into that, you've mentioned several platforms. How do these all work together? Before we get into the nitty gritty of Amazon, is there nuance there in terms of what to have on different platforms? And how do you think about SEO broader than Amazon?
I think the reason that you need to think a bit broader is because Amazon themselves have strategic problems they need to solve. And if you align your thinking with Amazon's thinking, or for that matter, if you're on Google with Google's thinking, then if you're in alignment with the big thrust, the great big waves and tides from these great big entities, then you're not swimming against the tide. So I think you need to understand a little bit about the broader picture. So in each SEO platform, Google, Amazon, indeed Spotify or Amazon Podcasts, those are the also SEO driven platforms. There are three players really. There's the consumer or the customer searching. There's the platform itself, run by a company that's not is for profit. It's not a charity, and it's not a natural phenomenon or an act of God. It is a commercial entity. And then the third thing is the advertisers or sellers. That's us, the third-party sellers. So really speaking, any SEO-driven platform has to show the consumers relevant and helpful results. Sometimes there's even a bit of an legal issue these days, but more commercially, it's kind of important so that people use Google instead of going to Bing, or they use Amazon instead of Etsy, etc., right? Or Walmart.com, their big rival. But there is a complicating factor there as well. To what extent the platform is pure SEO. So on Google, you'd say that traditionally people say there are three types of consumers or people that are searching, which is surfers. They're just kind of bored and looking for cat videos. Searchers, they want answers to questions. And shoppers. On Amazon, traditionally, we just say they're shoppers. Now, it is possible to find window shoppers on Amazon, which is another undesirable type of person because they click on your ads and cost you money, and then they don't buy your product. But broadly speaking, that's a fair sort of division. So there are some differences, but they've always got this tension that needs to be negotiated between the needs of the consumer, the needs of the platform, and the needs of the third-party sellers who give these platforms advertising revenue. And that's always a basic thing to bear in mind when you're thinking about how to handle SEO on each platform.
I like that. Okay, so that's an interesting tension point. I guess the other reason why understanding the broader platforms is important is because Google frequently ranks the marketplaces, the selling marketplaces, Etsy, Amazon, eBay items. And I heard that Bezos basically built Amazon on the back of Google advertising and tapping into the Google, system in the early days. I don't know if that's still true or not, like, how much they are, users of Google AdWords. But that's so you have to understand that you're not just optimizing for on platform, broadly, you're also optimizing as opposed for Google at the same time in a way.
That's a very good point, actually. Two things to that. First of all, I think Amazon is probably still one of the biggest, if not the biggest, AdWord spender in the world.
Yeah.
So Google is bigger than Amazon. It's more general than Amazon. It's been around for longer. It's the starting point for the internet. But even as people go directly to Amazon as a kind of product search engine, particularly in the USA, but across the world generally, nevertheless, a lot of searches for products do start on Google. And if you optimize your listing for Amazon SEO, you're right that there is a knock-on effect for Google SEO, although I would caution you against really focusing on Google SEO. I think Amazon SEO needs to come first. And if you get that right, Google will naturally sort of organically rank your products anyway. So I would focus on Amazon SEO, but you're right, there's potentially a knock-on effect that can happen as well.
Yeah. So you've got the advertisers on the platforms, like the advertisers, people who are spending money on Google, or sorry, on Facebook. Sorry, so many platforms.
Yeah.
You've got advertisers on Amazon who are advertising against specific, they're pushing products focused on specific key phrases. How do they factor into the mix on all of this?
Well, they're kind of a confusing factor, because all things being equal, if you want to run an SEO platform that serves the consumers best, you wouldn't have any advertisers. Now, for Google or Facebook, I mean, Facebook is not a search-driven platform, I guess, but for Google or YouTube, which is now owned by Google, no coincidence, because it works the same way, second biggest search engine in the world.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work at all, because the only stream they have is advertisers. So it's a bit like saying in American TV traditionally, or commercial TV in the UK, particularly in America, they have vast quantity of ads. You guys are pretty poorly served as consumers. But the reason you have such a poor consumer experience but still staying tuned in, two things: number one, everybody's doing it, so you haven't got a choice, and number two, the reason that the TV companies have so many ads is because the ads are what pay the money. So really their business model is advertisers pay us, and the only reason they pay us because we've got the consumers watching. So the consumers are kind of just cannon fodder for them to sell to the advertisers, and the advertisers make the economics work, right? Now, Amazon's got a very difficult tension, because Google just works that way, and it's simple. If they make their ads too big a percentage of the platform, people will go and use Bing, but that's the only tension. Now, Amazon has the tension that the consumers pay them for goods, and they want that to continue. And then they also get money from the advertisers. So there's a difficult tension there. What I would say is really on Amazon, the tension is veering in the direction of it becoming an advertising platform, because whenever Amazon sells a consumer any items, given that they're getting better and better shipping, it makes them less and less money. In fact, it loses them more and more money. So the only way that the retail arm of Amazon, and if we take AWS out of the picture, all of Amazon makes any money, is, apart from Prime, which comes from the consumers, pretty much driven from the third-party sellers. And advertising is by far the most profitable thing, and therefore they're becoming more of an advertising platform in terms of the profits, but they have to still appear to the consumers like they're a search engine / they're giving the best relevant results. And there's a big tension there that we are caught in the middle of, and you have to understand that big picture, I think.
Yeah, because if you're a consumer and you're searching for whatever, coffee, you want the best selling, best coffee to come up. Absolutely. Not the advertised, the highest with the most marketing budget coffee to come up. That's the tension. And so it is a real dance. I mean, I think a lot of us who use Amazon a lot focus on the BSRs, in the best selling ranks. And we know that all things being equal, you can juice those with short-term promotional tactics for a while. But if you look at a category over days or weeks, you'll see the organically best-selling items, and kind of get a feel for what actually high quality does look like, not just momentary high rank or pushed through campaigns or shenanigans or just straight advertised. Okay, so it's interesting, but these topics are common characteristics across all platforms. Is something that you had mentioned in some of our show notes. So what are the common characteristics across all platforms in your view, and how does that relate to all of this?
Well, I think really document relevance is one thing, message to query match, but then you've got the strategic level for the company and those tensions. So as I said, suggest to re-articulate, because I think it's so important. If you think like your consumer, you're more likely to align with your consumer, and that will work out in terms of them buying your products and giving you good reviews. The same is true with you making the effort to understand the platforms you operate on. So please, you operate the marketplace, you deal with these same tensions on Pixie Fair, right?
Yeah.
So I know the shareholders, in other words, the owners of the company, at least in your case, there's two of them rather than 10 million or something, the searchers and the advertisers. So really got the tensions behind that drive the strategy, making money for the company right now, maximize advertising versus keeping the end user the most relevant results, which means you maintain your market share. So Google has like 80% of the search market. Amazon has 40, 45, 50%, whatever it is, of e-commerce. And then you've got to keep the advertisers on board as well, because if the advertisers are making zero profit, hopefully if they're rational people, and many are not, it's an interesting question, but the ones who are more rational and the bigger spenders will simply go elsewhere eventually. So those are the three sort of areas that they're constantly juggling. And if you can understand where they're at in their juggling at any given point, I think you can align yourself on a strategic level fairly simply without getting caught in the weeds of, should you do this, that, or the other tactic.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's so hard to balance that tension, and I think let's dive into some details on where SEO optimizers start. But before we do that, to reinforce your point, I mean, our marketplace is 115 brands or so on Pixie Fair and over 3,000 products. And I can just tell you at that tiny level compared to Amazon, and we've done, I think, about 3 million transactions, but at that tiny level, 3,000 products, discovery is a huge issue. And people who are searching for things on our catalog of 3,000 still have a very challenging time, and we have a challenging time, presenting things to people who are looking by category types, eras. There's just so many ways, and so it is a massive challenge, I think, for the marketplace holders. This whole issue of discovery. That's the key. I think that's the key thing for me behind all of SEO. It's not just actually sales tactics, copywriting. To me, it's actually discovery and match to query. Are you serving them the right thing for what they're looking for? And if you are, they're going to buy it. It's like, it's not, to me, it's part of it to me is like, if I'm showing you what you're looking for, you're going to buy it if that's what you wanted. And it's just in a way that simple. But I know there's technical issues and fine points to jump into here. So where do you start, Michael, with people when they say, how do I tune up my SEO work and how do I start on this journey?
Well, what you just said is 100% right. The match to query. If you're giving a fantastic answer to a question, or in the case of buying a physical product, an answer to their need or a solution to their problem, whatever you want to call it, that's going to work well. And to the extent that the marketplace owner and operator, like you and Cinnamon on a small scale, or Amazon a giant scale, is successful at matching those two up, then the more sophisticated their and accurate their SEO work is, the less you have to worry about hacking the algorithm, and the more you have to worry about just being good at serving the consumer, which is the good news and the bad news. The good news is if you've got a great product and you care about your consumers, that should serve you. And if the bad news is if you're just trying to hack and you've got a terrible product, then your days are pretty much over. I was going to say numbered. They're pretty much over in the modern era, I think. So for me, I would start assuming that you've chosen a decent market that you can win, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But assuming that, and assuming that you got a product that solves your consumers' problems, and they give you 5-star reviews, which are two huge areas. But assuming you've got that right, then I would say you need to optimize your listing for conversion first. And the reason for that is two simple things. First of all, internal finances, profit and cash flow. If you go broke, it doesn't matter if your SEO strategy is great. But the second thing is, and this is unique to Amazon, not unique, but this is very strong on Amazon and on Google, they've broken this link, is because ranking and conversion rate are intimately linked. And by the way, if you think about it, if you're trying to serve the end consumers, so they should be. If consumers vote with their feet and their wallet and buy stuff, that tells Amazon fairly commonsensically, yeah, well, actually, we've answered their query, so we should keep showing this listing for that keyword. So the better Amazon gets at this, to some degree, the more you should focus on pleasing the consumer. And so I think that's absolutely the starting point. The product itself is not enough. It's about the messaging that you need to articulate. So that's the optimization piece. And that we've talked about that before. But even for Amazon SEO, that is the starting point.
I like that. I take your point completely, because serving the right product to the customer who's doing the query is sort of an arbitrary response. You would have, let's say, 50 sellers on the other end of that saying, "I'm the perfect product to feature to use as a response." No, I am. No, I am. No, I am. At the end of the day, the algorithm is going to dictate the truth by saying which one converts the best, and they'll lean into that more and more. And I think that makes sense, because it is a practical outcome that Amazon can say, we know the truth is, we've served all of these, 10 items or 50 items, and this one performs best when the customer actually has to make a purchasing decision. And so I think that you're right, there's a lot of logic in that. So focusing on conversion optimization is a key part of this for us. And to your point, that's what we want to, we want to make maximum money with minimum visitors to our product page. So this is the first point of it. Yeah. Great. So how do we do it? What do we do? I think you're muted, buddy. I think you're muted, pal.
Sorry, I was. Let me try that one again.
Okay, start over. Lost sound, yeah. Our users
It's okay.
have
I'll
told
start
us
over once we have
hello. We
sound.
lost sound. Sorry, Michael.
That's all right.
Okay.
I think there's a delay as well. So yeah, to your point, I think where the hell was I saying? Yes, to your point, Amazon.
How do we
is
focus on
getting
optimization? Sorry, yeah.
So to your point, Amazon. Shit, let me try again. To your point, Jason, I think Amazon is getting better at making sure that the results are relevant, and actually, therefore, it's not a kind of moral obligation. It simply is actually directly feeding into Amazon. It's not just a nice theory or a common sense or even marketing logic. It's actually showing up in the statistics that I'm privy to as well. So how do we do this? We discussed elsewhere about optimization. Just a quick recap: understand and articulate are the two things I would say. That first of all, understand your customer's pain, the person you're dealing with, and their psychographics. Make sure the product to market match is great. That'll only show up when it's in their hands, by the way. But once it's in their hands, they give you great reviews, and that is the mechanism that feeds it back into conversion rates. And then understand your benefits and make sure you're really clear about what's different about your product to other people. Nothing new, but a lot of this work gets kind of done at a superficial level, and you have to deep dive and be very, very meticulous and thorough and methodical about it. And then the second thing is once you've identified all this stuff, you need to put this across in words, images, and video marketing that is, again, incredibly good, thorough, and above all, absolutely crystal clear, and making sure that it is written and filmed and shot in a way that appeals to your target customer. We talked about that before, but if you're trying to rank on Amazon and you haven't done it yet, go do that first.
I love it. Okay, so how does that tie into BSRs, bestseller rankings, and that kind of thing?
So the pivot point, if you like, between listings and rankings is the keywords themselves. But the piece that people miss is that the clicks and conversions, which is to say add to cart or orders that come after a consumer has searched via those keywords, clicked on your listing or not, and then added its cart or not and bought it or not, are measured by Amazon and will directly feed back into your SEO, your search engine optimization. Really, SEO on Amazon seems a bit primitive compared to Google, but when you think about it, Google has all sorts of ways. I think the problem that it has to solve a very complex question, which is what's in the mind of the searcher. Have they had their question answered? And that's quite a subtle thing to answer. Whereas with Amazon, the end result is buying, and that's, as you said, a much more concrete signal to deal with. So really, two things in the listing. Number one is keyword targeting. You've got to target the right keywords, make sure they're in the listing, but number two, make sure they're relevant to the customer. In other words, you're offering a great solution to the problem they have. If you are selling, a blue widget, I don't know, blue iPhone holder, then do not put the word red iPhone holder in, even though some people will click on it and the odd person will buy, because not many people will buy, and Amazon's algorithm will notice that and start penalizing you, not only for the word red iPhone holder, but if you do it often enough, they'll start to just generally de-rank your listing because you're not actually playing by their rules, which is their overall thrust is to try and answer these tensions I've discussed, which is they need to give relevant answers to consumers. And if you keep giving irrelevant answers as a platform, consumers will disappear, and they know that. So at some point they will punish you for irrelevance. So relevance is absolutely critical. The other thing to think about as a broader thing is search intent, which means when somebody puts in a keyword into Amazon, or for that matter, Google, what are they wanting to achieve? If somebody puts in headache pills, they don't want pills that give you a headache. They want pills that take away the headache. It's kind of obvious, right? But some things are a bit more subtle than that. I mean, if somebody puts in back brace, they're probably wanting to solve the problem of back pain. It's just possible that you might have something that isn't strictly a back brace, but is so closely aligned with that search intent that you should consider putting that keyword in. So you have to think like a human being and not just be literal minded about this as well.
Solutions to problems. Yeah.
Exactly right.
I love that. Okay. Hey, you mentioned a kind of a little cascading funnel there a moment ago on, first you get the impression, then you get the add to cart, then you get the actual sale to occur. Now, Amazon has a one-click purchase, so all that can be first impression and then purchase can be instantaneous.
Yeah.
But sometimes people do go to their cart to update their mailing address or credit card info or that kind of thing. So that's key to your thinking here, is that funnel effect. And that's similar to Shopify, actually, in many ways. Any commentary on that kind of cascading set of steps? Any nuance there?
I think you need to, because all this stuff can get very complex, you need to come back to extremely clear-minded sort of mental model of what's happening, which is quite simple in terms of the customer journey through Amazon. The psychological drivers may be complex, but it's impressions. Do they see your product listing or not, right? And that is the keyword ranking. That's the SEO piece we're talking about. But because Amazon links it all together, one of the ranking signals for should they show your product listing under the keywords, say, you know, blue iPhone holder, is the click-through rate. So if they show your products listing 100 times and then 1,000 times and only one person clicks, that's a 0.1% click-through rate. That's too low. That doesn't show very good relevance. Remember, relevance being a golden rule. The second thing is if people click onto your listing, otherwise known as a session, and only out of 100 people who visit your page, one person buys, that's a conversion rate of 1%. That shows also very bad relevancy. Now, relevancy is an interesting question because it's not just about relevancy on Google. It's relevancy plus a kind of quality of a blog post or whatever it is, or a Google or Amazon, sorry, a YouTube video. But on Amazon, it's about value for money as well. And that's quite subtle blend. So it's really hard to know whether somebody clicked on your listing because it has a beautiful image, or it's very relevant, or it's the average rating or the price. And it's actually a blend of all four. So the only way to tell which one's driving it is to play with those factors. And that's a conversion optimization question, but it leads straight back into SEO. So you really can't separate the two in the Amazon space. So you have to think about those metrics. Click-through rates being, I would say, about 1% or above, and conversion rates, you know, how long's a piece of string, but you want it to be in the 10, 20% range, 30%, maybe not a few percent.
For our Shopify consulting clients, one of the things we look at a lot is this in Shopify backend, this products that are viewed and then added to cart and then actually sold. And that little funnel in Shopify we can look at. And if your numbers are very disparate, you know, like your, and I guess the equivalent here is on Amazon is what I want to ask you about. But, you know, if your impressions number is really high and your, your added to cart number is much, much, much lower, or in anywhere in that funnel, if there's a huge deviation, I've always talked to our Shopify consulting clients about ways they can, shrink those numbers. In essence, you don't want to, lower the impressions, but what you want to do is raise the close rate, in essence. Now, in Shopify, we have a few tricks of the trade we can bring to that party. You can do things like retargeting with email marketing for abandoned checkout, or text messaging for abandoned checkout, and different things like that. On Amazon, are there things to be done there? How would you consult with somebody who's getting the good impressions, but their sales rate maybe is lower? Is there any equivalent there on the Amazon side?
It's a really interesting question. So here's what I would say. Amazon as a platform is a bit like you with a direct-to-consumer site. They know this stuff, and Amazon probably has an incredibly sophisticated way of retargeting abandoned checkout, stuff like that. Now, as an Amazon consumer myself, I'm quite a busy one. I should know better. Where I can't remember whether Amazon starts emailing me say, "Hey, you've abandoned your cart." I don't think they particularly do, actually, but I imagine they would certainly take that into account. Obviously, things like retargeting for abandoned checkouts for us as Amazon sellers are not possible. Unfortunately, it gets worse than that, because the actual data to start with, we are not privy to the organic impressions data. This is one of the massive problems. I mean, Amazon knows exactly what's going on, but they do not share it with a third-party seller. So impressions, clicks, conversions are the golden trinity of the stats, marketing stats for internet marketing, digital marketing, right? Unfortunately, one of those we're driving blind on because we do not get organic impressions. So the best way you can deal with that is to run Amazon ads. In this instance, not as a way to drive sales as a solution to the problem you mentioned, but for informational purposes. Because if you're advertising on the keyword blue iPhone holder, for example, and you get 1,000 impressions, but you get a 0.1 click-through percentage, then you can clearly see from the advertising data that is happening, and you can extrapolate to some degree and with some major degree of uncertainty, but still to a degree, that is happening on the organic side as well. So that's the best you can do in terms of stats. In terms of solutions, unfortunately, it really comes down to the same things, which is optimizing for conversion, but for a particular keyword. So if you are selling a blue iPhone holder, the search intent behind this is my first question. What are they trying to achieve? Well, hold an iPhone. Duh. Well, yes. Okay. But in what context? I mean, I've got an iPhone holder right here on my desk. It's a bit too low because I use it as a kind of third screen. Okay. Well, in that case, you need quite a different physical solution. Does your product fit that situation? If not, don't try and sell it to those people because it will backfire. You'll get rude reviews and Amazon will notice and punish you. But is it, for example, in a bedroom? Is it for work? Is it for pleasure? Those are some of the questions you've got to get into before you can really deep dive into the answer, which is to target a really clear answer to a clear search intent. Often people make generically pretty images, but they don't actually communicate anything. I think it's more important to clarify what is it you're trying to communicate, and then make sure your images are beautiful, but make sure they're clear. And once you clarify that stuff, it tends to really drive conversion rates up, and that should help ranking for the keywords that are relevant to that kind of answer. That's the best I can say. So you've got to work around the houses with this stuff. It's a really kind of fiddly, tricky stuff sometimes.
So we've talked about relevance to the consumer and answering their question or query. What comes after that?
Well, really, once you think about relevance to consumer, that's all very well, but you do not exist in a vacuum, as you said. There's 50 other people claiming the same thing, like we can help you with your iPhone holding needs, for example. So then you've got to think about the competition, and can you actually win a search engine result page kind of competition? And really speaking, that's a question of sort of a mixture of what overall market you're going for. For example, would I go into the iPhone holder market? I wouldn't, because I think it's just saturated. But even if you decide you are going to do that, then you really need to think about a short list of reasonably short tail keywords that are relevant to your competition, and really thinking about I'm going to go for like titanium iPhone holders or something very specialist because I could win it, and abandon the sort of overall market. So those kinds of questions, really.
Okay, but let me just ask you this real quick. Is winning it just a function of getting more reviews than the next guy? Or is it more than that?
Not really, no. So here's my take on reviews and its relationship to SEO on Amazon. And I'm not an incredibly technical Amazon consultant. I don't run a PPC agency. I know people who do, and I discuss things with them quite often. But my take on it is there's not a direct correlation. However, indirectly, having a 5-star average rating, and I think the average rating, not number of reviews, by the way, is really, really important. Because if you drop from a 5-star average to 4.5 star, I've seen a drop in conversion rate as much as half. So it goes from say 40% to 20% or something like that, which means obviously if your conversion rate drops, that sends a very powerful signal to Amazon that you are not pleasing the people who have clicked onto your search result as a result of searching for, I know, iPhone holder blue or whatever it is. So that kind of indirectly, because review rate's so powerful for conversion rate, the conversion rates are powerful for SEO. It does indirectly affect it, but not directly, is my understanding.
Okay. So then let's say the next thing is really winning the search engine results page rank question. How do you do that then? If it's not just about reviews, if it's more nuanced than that, what goes into it? Yeah.
Well, really, it's we've talked about relevance. So picking a keyword fight that you can win. So if I want to go for iPhone charger or something, then that's going to be unwinnable, because there will be Chinese companies out there who will sell them for a quarter of the price that I would sell them for, probably at a loss, but they don't care because the Communist Party is bankrolling them and so forth. So that's the first thing. And there is really a budgetary side to this, because if you want to kick off your ranking and launch a product, it's a slightly different question from how to rank overall, but they're all linked, because if you can't get ranked in the first place when you launch, then it tends to become a self-fulfilling thing and you stay not ranked for the right keywords. So in order to do that, you're going to have to pay money into rather sad ways, really. One is by reducing the cost of the product, because a lower price means it looks like better value, so you get better click-through rates and you get better conversions, which gives you better organic ranking. You also kick off, incidentally, getting reviews earlier, which will help with the conversion rate, which helps with ranking. And then the other side, that's the conversion side, and the other side is traffic. And when you start with, as we've discussed many times, you start with a cold start, as Amazon puts it.
Yeah.
So you need to pay money for advertising, and so you're going to need to budget for ads. And really, that's part of your decision of which markets to enter into and which keywords specifically to target, because some would cost a fortune to rank for, and some will be more affordable.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about this before, this Amazon cold start challenge, right? And so your basic commentary is it's very, very difficult to rekindle or reboot a product, or do you think it will resurrect something from the dead? Is that possible?
Could you just restate that, because the internet cut out there?
Is it possible to resurrect a product from the dead on Amazon? Not to get too religious,
Good
but
question.
Yeah.
I think it is, but I think it's got a bad history behind it. It's a little bit like if you've, a bad student at school, or an employee that's got a question mark over their head in work. I mean, you're going to have to be a bit exceptional, and you're going to have to be consistent. So if you sort of show the odd spike of good behavior and convert customers, and then they start buying it and giving you rude reviews after a while, then that's going to show up, quite simply, that's going to show up in the conversion rates, and that will then show up in the rank, right? I'm not saying, by the way, that Amazon doesn't take any notice of reviews in their actual ranking algorithm as well, but it kind of comes to the same thing. So I guess, to answer your question, if you are consistent in changing things, then you can probably resurrect dead products. It's not something I kind of specialize in, but normally the reason it doesn't come up naturally that often for me is because if a product has a problem and it shows up in the reviews, unless you completely redesigned it, and some people do, but most people just abandon it, therefore they never bother to try and re-rank it. And if it didn't get ranked in the first place because they couldn't afford it, then that normally doesn't change. And again, unless they've got some investment, but then why would an investor want to put good money after what looks like bad money? So there's a natural few things that mitigates against it normally happening in real life. It is possible.
It's almost like the snowball rolling downhill towards success seems easy, but trying to get it to roll uphill is a really, really tough battle. Okay, that's interesting.
It is, yeah.
Let me ask you one other question before we move on from this reviews related topic. I've heard at conferences, people who are private label people who basically say any review that's like 4 stars or 3 stars, they'll just go to Amazon and ask the review to be removed. And really just honestly, I think unethically, have low ranked reviews that are honest reviews removed. Hopefully you think that's scummy behavior like I do. But Amazon seems to tolerate it. From what I've heard from these people, Amazon seems to let you do that as a seller. It seems so wrong. Somebody leaves a heartfelt 3-star review on a product. I mean, as an author, I've got a lot of books on Amazon.
Yeah.
If it's a 3-star review and they just didn't like my book, and I can't ask that be removed. That seems so unethical, but I don't know if you have an opinion. Like, I've expressed my very strong opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I'd say is good for you. And I guess the majority of sellers that I know, or at least the ones who are willing to talk to me about it, are frankly more willing to manipulate things in their favor. And I guess if you've got, $50,000 worth of product on its way from China, and you're about to, have the economics if it goes south because of some rude reviews, which does happen, you can see that people have a powerful incentive, possibly not losing their house or something ultimately to go the other way. Now, I'm not going to comment so much on the ethics of it, but the couple of points really, sort of, if you like, take an amoral rather than immoral stance. Amorally speaking, objectively speaking, that Amazon is unlikely to remove a review unless there's a really good reason anyway, because not so much for ethical reasons, I suspect, or they may have ethical dilemmas at Amazon. They don't come across that way, but for practical reason that they want to retain the trust of consumers. There is a lot of bad publicity about Amazon and the reviews manipulation, probably rightfully so. But anyway, that irrespectively, there's a PR problem there for them, and they need to be acting on it and seem to be acting on it. So for that reason, it's pretty hard to persuade Amazon to remove a review anyway. So it's kind of a moot point, whether you choose on ethical grounds not to do it or whether you trying to manipulate everything. It comes to the same thing, which is Amazon will just say, no, thanks, we're not going to change it.
I hope that's true. The presenter I remember hearing said they just keep putting out a customer service ticket until somebody does it. And I thought, you know what? I'm sorry. I'll express the moral opinion. That's just wrong. It's just so wrong. So anyway, let's move on. But I'm just saying, please, in my view, you should not do that as a seller. And if your product is marginal or average, then let the market speak. And
well, here's what I would say is, sorry.
Go. Yeah, go.
Sorry, you froze up. You said let the market speak, which is an excellent phrase, and then you froze up. So,
go improve your product.
Absolutely. Here's what I would say. I remember talking. It's funny, the ethical side. Don't end up discussing it very much, but probably because I don't speak to many people who have strong faith like you do. But I guess. But here's what I would say. I remember back in sort of Sunday school years ago, this lady who was not kind of a conventionally Christian lady, shall we say, but she thought about this stuff a lot. She was a very, very bright lady. She was a poet, so who think a lot, but aren't necessarily conventionally kind of ethical, I suppose. But anyway, she said to me something which has struck me as very true over the last while, which is if something's morally wrong, it's probably going to show up in results at the end anyway. It just may take a bit of time. So to your point, I don't think there's a real ethical dilemma in the sense that if your product's bad, basically it's going to end up failing anyway. And short-term manipulation is kind of irrelevant. Maybe it's unethical behavior. Maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe you think you're going to lose your house, so you should. Either which way, the outcome's going to be the same. So to your point, I think it kind of averages out to the same thing, which is kind of unethical behavior tends to mean that people don't trust you. Lack of trust means people don't do business with you. Lack of business means that your business dies. So it comes to the same thing, I guess. This lady happened to be a Quaker, and one of the things that the Quakers were very successful business people in 19th century Britain. They made things like Cadbury's and Schweppes and quite a lot of Quaker oats, and one of the reasons for that is because people trusted them. They said they were going to do something, and they did it. And so, to your point, I guess in the end, you could see ethics as a as a business advantage, if you like. Anyway,
absolutely right.
Slight sideshow, but we have got ethics as one of our sort of pillars of content. So I take your point.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's keep. This is good. So let's keep going. So let me ask you this question: do you think it's important to focus on one key phrase, or do you think a cluster of key phrases are kind of what you want to go after? I mean, like we've talked for our listeners about us being maniacally focused on the e-commerce with only one deviation. Either it has the dash or it does not have the dash in our Spotify and that kind of focus for the podcast. But on Amazon, how do you consult your private label product sellers? Should they go after one singular phrase, or should they kind of have an umbrella approach to it?
Well, here's what I would say: that the more sophisticated the algorithm gets, it's there for a purpose, which is again relevance for the consumer, right? Quality in Amazon world, that means quality products at the right price, as opposed to merely just relevance of the document to the query, like in the Google world, right? But they're not getting sophisticated for random reasons. They're trying to get better at that job whilst balancing out these tensions of Amazon keeping its market share and making revenue from advertisers, right? So the better the algorithms get, the more common sense or human-like they are, which is to say the artificial intelligence is getting more like human intelligence. So people don't search just for one keyword. They have a variety of keywords that are associated with each other. I guess they're not even necessarily short or long-tail variations of the same keywords. In Google, they call it the LSIs and latent semantic index, and maybe Amazon hasn't quite gone as far as that, but you have to trust the algorithm and common sense. And I would answer very clearly a cluster of keywords rather than one keyword, which means the good news is it's common sense and it's how consumers behave. The bad news is as soon as we put our marketer hats on, we totally forget what it feels like to be a consumer. It's an empathy problem, really. You've got to think about what would a consumer, well, you've got two ways. You've either got to imagine what a consumer would put in to search for your products and then really get a sense of the competitive landscape for each individual keyword. But the other way of doing it is if you're not very imaginative, then don't bother thinking or imagining. Go and talk to consumers, go and talk to people and ask them to search. Don't ask them what they would search for, just ask them to search and to video it, anything like that. And get your mum to do it if your mum is an obsessive shopper for iPhone holders, whatever it is. So get human input and then filter it through the algorithm. Don't start with the algorithm because that's the wrong starting point. That's not Amazon's starting point. That's not Google's starting point. They start with the human intent and they engineer an algorithm to end up with two outcomes, which is number one, a sale for Google or Amazon, and number two, getting relevant results for the consumers, which means they keep coming back.
So you mentioned the phrase long tail keyword. Obviously, I'm familiar with that phrase. For those of our listeners who I think most people would be, but Chris Anderson's classic book that everyone should read is fantastic for that. Long tail. What's the name of the book?
I think it's just called The Long Tail. Yeah, very, very good. 2007 original, wasn't it? And it's really dated incredibly well for anything to do with digital marketing. Absolutely agree.
It has. So do you focus on long tail keywords with your clients mostly, or do you go for the big, hard, category killer for, key phrase or keyword? What's the best strategy?
Interesting question. I would say it's actually not really an either or question because it used to be that you could just focus on longer tail keywords. So instead of iPhone holder titanium blue or something really obscure like that. I would say most competent competitors will already be doing this anyway. So in an established market, you probably won't find that's enough. So really, I think you need to just think of it in two phases. Ultimately, you need to decide what sort of shorter or medium tail keyword, I don't know, iPhone holder, iPhone X or something that you're going to go for. And that is really your aim in the medium term or even longer term. But then in order to get there, you may want to target long tail keywords that contain your short tail keywords. For example, iPhone holder, iPhone X blue, iPhone holder, iPhone X plastic, etc., etc. And there'll probably be 100 such keywords or whatever it is, maybe hundreds. And if you like, every time you rank as Kevin King, the great Amazon sales expert, put it to me. By the way, a guru who I think also really, really knows his stuff, Kevin King, it gets my vote. He's a very competent guy. But anyway, he said, for example, if you go for widget blue, widget red, widget small, widget big, then you'll start, again, if you like, every time you get a sale on one of those or even a click, you'll get about a 10th of the ranking juice for the word widget that you would have had if you just put the word widget in. So that's really the long tail ranking theory. I guess it's similar in the Google world, right? That you would know more than me. But you've got to bear in mind that in the end, you are trying to rank for whatever your target keywords are directly, and you are still going to have a cost commensurate with that. So again, don't kid yourself that you are going to end up ranking for iPhone X anything, because that's just not a sensible end goal. And don't kid yourself that you're going to just take a little piece out of the market that is blue iPhone X cases, because somebody else will have had that already. You have to think a bit more in the middle ground, really, I think.
Okay, let me ask you about that before we move on to the next part of our conversation. Because iPhone is an obvious, unwinnable, but there are many, many, many products on Amazon where it's like, is it winnable? I don't know. How do you coach people who are in that middle of the world kind of quasi-popular, some people looking, but it doesn't have huge cultural relevance like iPhone? How do you tell if it's winnable or not? How do you judge? What are the criteria you use to figure this stuff out?
Well, so I guess there's two sides to it. It's a very, very good question. It's a really great question. So I'm glad you asked me that. I hadn't really thought about asking that. Two things. First of all, I think you've got to look at the upside potential, and then you've got to look at the competition. So the upside potential, the opportunity, how valuable would it be if you won good market share, like you got ranked in position 4, which is an Amazon way of looking at impressions data, which is an Amazon way of looking at market share. Same with Google, some digital marketers' way of looking at market share. But if you zoom out a bit and think like a business person, irrespective of medium, market share. Okay, so if I can get 10% of the market share for iPhone X plastic phone holders a year, how much would that be worth? Not just in revenue, which is traditionally how you measure market share, but how much profit would it make you? Okay, that's one side. The other one is affordability and cash flow. Okay, to get to that position, how much money is it going to cost us? By the way, if the opportunity is poor, then don't bother. And the second one is, assuming the opportunity is good and worth having, how much would it cost us to get there? So you have to think about, there's lots of parts of the economics when you're a private label product developer. If you're a wholesaler, it's similar but a bit simpler, which is to say, how much is the cost of goods sold, the cost of the products, landed cost, or whatever it is, and that whatever's left between that and the revenue is what you've got left to do things like advertising or do price reductions, which are two sides of the same coin. They're going to increase conversion rate and get your ranking right. So you've really got to try and cost out not only how much budget is going to cost you, that's the next thing, but then the third thing is cash flow. Okay, so it's going to cost you $40,000 to rank, and you're going to have 40,000 flow out of your account. How quickly is it going to happen? In 3 months? Okay. Do you have $50,000 in the bank allocated just to product launch, not product cost, but product launch for a single product column? Because it could be that you could rank for something crazy like spatula. Literally had a client a while ago, or kind of a collaborator, who was ranking for something like vegetable spiralizer. It was a few years ago, but it was still insane. And they literally, after the product patent and production costs and shipping costs, they spent $40,000 for 3 months to then make 50,000 profit the next month, and then on from that, it made a huge amount of profit. The opportunity was high, but the cash flow required was so vast that most people wouldn't do that. So opportunity size, budget, cash flow, a lot of it comes down to money. Now, in terms of how do you make that decision based on what you're looking at, I would say a few rules of thumb. First of all, if you take 1 month's worth of revenue on Amazon, if you multiply that by 3, that's going to be, if you divide it by, say, 4, if that's your total landed cost, and you assume you're importing from China in normal times. By the way, in 2021, right now, is not the case because shipping times are all up in the air. But even in normal times, you're going to have 3 months worth of inventory at least. So you can multiply that number by 3. That's the amount you need for your product. And then you need to look at the amount that you need to spend on price reductions. You're probably going to need to take it down a substantial, maybe 25% below and at standards for market price. Then you got to look at the cost per click and do some maths on it. And normally speaking, if you're even asking the question, should I go into this market? It looks a bit competitive, but juicy. In most cases, the answer is no, don't do it. And that means that a lot of things that look like opportunities aren't. And that means you've got to look at hundreds of opportunities. And that's frustrating. But that is, I think, the reality for a lot of people, I'm afraid. It's not a sexy answer, but there aren't that many opportunities always on Amazon.
What are the software tools you like to use to do that? I've heard Viral Launch is a tool that you can use for that kind of thing. Are there others?
Three standard ones that are really good for keyword research. Viral Launch, created by Casey Gorse, who's gone off to do other things now. Very good. Jungle Scout. Greg's a very smart guy. Haven't spoken to him for ages, but he knows his stuff. And Helium 10, which tends to be the one I use, and the one that most of my Amazon seller friends use would be the main tool.
Okay. And now we come to the part of our show where Michael is going to share a simple 3-step process for improving your Amazon SEO without advertising. Michael, what are the 3 steps involved?
Good. I should have probably put these right up front, but I just wanted to give a grown-up sort of more strategic thinker, because I think these tactical things are all over the internet. But the 3 things are measuring, defining the target keyword list, and building those into your listing, really.
Well, that sounds too simple. Is it that easy?
Kind of is and it isn't. If you've got the market choice wrong and you don't have an advertising budget, then you are going to go wrong. So the first thing is measuring. Before you do anything, you need to remember to set up a baseline measurement to see if the things you're doing to achieve your outcome are actually doing any good, because they often don't, and you need to know that. So in the terms of keyword ranking is really our objective here. Then measure up front before you start doing anything keyword ranking using a tool like Helium 10. Many things out there that will do it. And then check your metrics weekly. Have a weekly review, preferably with a coach or somebody who knows their staff, or mastermind member, somebody who's sold on Amazon and is willing to go out for coffee with you, whatever. But check that, especially when you're launching new products, and make sure you keep an eye on the metrics. Above all, how much have you spent? How much keyword ranking have you gained? Because if you're gaining no keyword ranking, you need to change what you're doing. Really basic, simple idea, but a lot of people skip that. They just do stuff based on the fact they've heard that it works. And you've always got to have your own data to verify or disprove your theory is, no matter how great the provenance is,
mm-hmm.
because everything's different, each business is different, each
Mm-hmm.
product behaves differently. Things shift over time very quickly in this space as well.
Wow. Michael, we're an hour into this conversation and we're like halfway through our outline.
We are.
I'm just
We can always
saying,
revisit
should
this and
we make a part 2 of this
Part
whole
2.
entire recording so we can have maybe 4 whole sessions on this topic?
Yeah, I think
We
it's
might
worth
want to
it
do
because
that, huh?
everyone should be obsessing this. So the practical ways you can improve your
Yeah.
SEO without advertising, we can dive into that next time. So let's by all means do that.
Why don't we do that? So why don't we break it here? You want to summarize for us where we're at so far in the conversation, and then we'll turn this into a legit 2-parter next week. We'll take on second part of the conversation.
Absolutely. So first thing is SEO really is about relevance to the consumer query. So just make sure that you bear that in mind front and center. If you're trying to sell a blue widget to people who are searching for a red widget, it sounds really obvious, but I see a lot of that, and that's going to get penalized by unintelligent consumers and therefore by any well-run platform, including Amazon, Google, or anybody else. Just think about the fact that even if you're not a private label seller, you may be able to optimize listings. If you can, that is the key to driving Amazon SEO, unlike other SEO platforms. So if you're a wholesaler, try your best to get some permission from the brand owner to modify the listing. And if you're a retail arbitrager, at least consider using Amazon ads. We haven't really talked about that. We'll talk about that practical thing the next time. But don't just kind of assume that you're kind of helpless in the face of the existing listing. If you're a wholesaler, if you're a private labeler, you definitely need to make the effort there. It's really critical to get this right, because advertising to buy sales just doesn't work economically, will not make you profit. And you need to really think about this tension that each platform is negotiating between the shareholders, consumers, and advertisers, and how they are balancing it out. And you need to align yourself with that. In terms of SEO on Amazon, you need to optimize for conversion first. You need to understand the consumers and articulate how your product solves the problems, and preferably how it solves them better than everybody else. And really the pivot point between the listing and SEO is keywords and then clicks and conversions. And the other thing I guess we were saying is really keyword strategy needs to be a bit commonsensical. By all means, target long tail keywords, but understand in the end you probably want a sort of medium tail keyword in most cases. And the final thing to say is, if you've chosen a really hyper competitive market, no amount of tactical stuff is going to actually rescue you. So it comes down to that boring old truth, which is you have to pick the right market and you have to serve them with relevant goods. And if you pick an over competitive market or you don't serve them well, you don't win, sadly.
I love it. Well, what a conversation, man. This is a deep dive into all things SEO on Amazon. So we're going to pick it up next time and continue the conversation. So if you're following along with us live, feel free to ask questions and we'll pick them up next time. If you are listening to the replay on any of the platforms that we're broadcasting this into, of course, ask questions as well. We'll weave them into part 2 of the conversation. So Michael, thank you as always. And just one final call to action. If you are loving this podcast, then feel free to leave us a like or subscription or whatever you can do on whatever player of choice you use. But it's just an honor to have people give us that kind of feedback. Heard from somebody yesterday who said they really love the podcast, and it's always great to hear that. And so thank you, everybody, for hanging in there with us, and really, really appreciate it. Michael, as always, it's an honor, sir. Have a great evening there in London.
Thanks, man. Have a great day over in Seattle, Washington.